Hello, my name is ScienceBeard, and amid the negativity about teaching and learning, I've decided to make some videos which may prove useful for new teachers. One of the problems with being an engaged and self-critical teacher is that you find that criticism is leveled at you and you have no defense at your fingertips. Maybe you've seen somebody else do something which works and copied it, but you don't really know why it works. Or you do something routinely which works and you feel good about it, but you would feel awkward explaining it to somebody else. Well, this may help you explain why you already do things that work and foster good relationships with your students and justify them to others and yourself. And here's a mantra of mine. If it's a good idea, it's a good idea for everybody. If something works for some students, it will likely work for others, albeit modified a bit. Okay, so the first thing to say is this comes from a book called Interaction Design, and it is written by Jenny Priest and others. And the idea is basically that it's a book about how to design computer interfaces. And the logic of why I have, when I came across this, I thought this would be a good book to use is because interaction design and computing generally has a wealth of really good research behind it. And interaction design in particular is aimed at minimizing frustration. And I will mention this. What I will do is I will show you that. Um, what I will do is I will use quotes from this book and I will use ideas from this book and then circle back towards teaching. So the principles of human interaction design are basically that you create systems which are satisfying, enjoyable, fun, entertaining, helpful, motivating, aesthetically pleasing, supportive of creativity, rewarding, and emotionally fulfilling. Okay, so all of these are, of course, lofty goals. And the reason why I've applied a filter to my webcam is because I thought this would be more aesthetically pleasing than actually having to look at my ugly mug. So also I've got kids in the background and you can see some toys there somewhere behind me. Anyway, so that's the idea. So I will not go on to too much about why these are uh, the goals that some systems have, because that should be pretty obvious. Okay, so the first the first bit of reasoning that I came to when sort of reading about interaction design and what I took from my previous career as a career, say, I did programming for a bit for money, so was that I know that there are people employed in the computer, particularly in the gaming industry, which are supposed to they are supposed to do things which trigger your endorphins and thereby trigger you buying their stuff. So the goals of designing interactive products to be fun, enjoyable, pleasurable, aesthetically pleasing, and so on are concerned primarily with the user experience. By this, we mean what the interaction with the system feels like to the users. So what do we mean by satisfying? I mean that after an activity, there should be endorphins. This can come from a sense of accomplishment, or in the case of failure, trying very hard, but still getting a reward, or completing a task, or having all the gaps filled in, or a surprise, or something else. The approach is everyone is a winner, but not to make it so obvious and easy that it becomes meaningless. Gamify the activity if you can. This is tough for me personally, and I steal inspiration wherever I can. My mantra about things you find difficult to do is steal and copy. Look at ADHD resources for gamifying and setting small achievable targets. They're great. Also, accountability buddies is an idea that comes from there. I'm not an expert on ADHD, I just steal their ideas. I've also put in a link to How to ADHD, a very informative YouTube channel. I will also make a video on what is asked of you as a new teacher in terms of coping with people with ADHD in your classroom. I don't think enjoyable and fun need explaining, but in my case, I needed to find out what my pupils found enjoyable and fun. This wasn't because I'm old, although probably part of it, but because they are different from place to place and have different backgrounds. I would thoroughly recommend the book The Design of Everyday Things by Don Norman as a general read, but I will give a quick overview of the most important design principles, particularly affordances. So Don Norman talks about visibility, feedback, constraints, mapping, consistency, and affordance. Well, actually, Jenny Priest talks about them, but she cribbed a few things from the Design of Everyday Things, which is sort of what I just talked about, stealing things. So visibility. This should be an obvious one, no pun intended, but visibility refers to the visibility of the important information. Is the information which the pupils or students need obvious? Are the instructions visible at all times? Of course, you can tell them, but they also need to be there so that they can refer back to them or read up on them should they have not, listened. I usually put the instructions on the board, on a sheet, and tell them verbally, so all three things together. Doesn't stop them not being able to follow the instructions, of course, but that's entirely a different problem. Feedback isn't just for after an activity or parts of an answer or a test scenario. In computer-human interaction design, it could be the rotating egg timer or the bar which fills up while up or downloading or playing a video. One thing that is really frustrating is when you want any sort of feedback. Just show me something, and there's just nothing. It doesn't have to be much, just a sign of life, a lit or flickering LED, anything. And the same is true for the classroom. Inform students that you've seen the hand up or heard the question, even or especially when you can't answer it right then and there. Remind me later, or my favorite, I know that you know, let's have somebody else, or I've seen your hand up, is often sufficient to quell that frustration. Teachers are often not seen as human by pupils or students, but this is a way that you can be better than a computer. Imagine that. Constraints, or constraining, which I'm quoting directly from Priest's book, refers to determining ways of restricting the kind of user interaction that can take place at a given moment. As a science teacher doing practicals, I have to prevent some enthusiastic students pouring their chemicals into the same beaker at the same time. I do this by giving clear instructions, but also preparing the chemicals in such a way that access is limited. There's no access to stock bottles, for example. Pipettes are provided with the chemicals and they are in a particular place. Away from practicals, the outcomes need to be clear and the activity needs to lead them towards the outcome. This is, of course, not a new idea. Word banks are one such way in which you can restrict the interactions. However, all too often this is seen as too simplistic, especially for higher ability students or older ones. But here's the thing. Is guess what is in my head and a blank space in a text or sentence a better approach? Do you want to have the students guessing 17 different answers and have that conversation with at least half of them? Constraints in computer programs are often about the sort of input that makes sense, and we're all familiar with it. Date of birth in numbers, telephone numbers in numbers, email has an @ symbol in it, etc., etc. If the expected input is wrong, the program points this out and no human intervention is needed. Your worksheet or projected activity can do the same for you. Apologies if you feel I'm telling you something you already know, but another good thing to be able to do in teaching is to justify why you are doing it. And this gives you a sound theoretical underpinning for doing this for whoever you want, irrespective of age or ability, and reduces workload and doesn't compromise pedagogy. Mapping is the idea that symbols need to map onto actions. On a computer keyboard, one of the best examples are the cursor keys. If you have a separate block of 4 arrows, the up key is on top of the down key, which is right below it, and then left and right are on the left and right. The rest of the keyboard trains its user into eventually being relatively okay, but it is the opposite of good mapping. It is not alphabetical. There's an apocryphal story about how it was intended to slow down typists who were too quick on mechanical typewriters. It was not designed with language in mind, very much anyway. So how does this apply to teaching? Your activities, as far as they have instructions, can be supported by pictograms, and so can rules and discipline measures. Giving a student a yellow card quietly rather than telling them off can work very well. Of course, you can train them in non-verbal communication as well. This maps over very well as well, as most people probably use the same gestures or facial expressions. Feedback is another area. Thumbs up or down beats any other form of quick survey of the confidence of the class and enables all students to give feedback safely. There's no embarrassment. There are many such signs or systems which can map over. Writing learning objectives as a tweet, keeping to a character limit can be fun, or writing it in text speak, or asking them to write down smileys for how they feel about a topic during homework, rather than asking students to explicitly state what they think. But make sure you constrain their possible answers in symbol form, as we all know what they're like. They're like us, just smaller. Consistency is another thing which is very important, of course. It is important that you are consistent, but your activities and lessons and materials can be as well. One of the earliest examples that science teachers will come across is the wearing of PPE for their students. No safety glasses, no experiments. But consistency can also be good in the way that activities are designed. The reward is clear, the process is clear, the instructions are clear. You don't have to worry too much about whether your students know what to do next, which may not contribute to their learning while being an insurmountable obstacle to their learning at the same time. If you don't know what you're doing and you don't know how to do it, then you can't really learn very well. It helps with brains and the attached learners that are atypical as well. A routine can be very comforting, and that makes deviating from the routine even more rewarding. I never allowed eating in the lab of anything, unless where it was a very special privilege for those break time attenders, or as a reward for good behavior where experiments were edible. I did edible experiments. The shared sense of appearing to break the rules, of course I had done a Kosh assessment to cover myself, was good for establishing that you too can be rebellious while not endangering the well-being of your students. It has to be the exception to remain fun. A lot of my worksheets had easy, medium, and hard questions on them, split into 3 groups. I would ask different students to answer different questions as a minimum expectation. Quite often, I would attach points to them and ask them to reach, let's say, 20 points. They could then pick questions which scored to 20. It gives the learner ownership, and it allows you a little choice as the learner. Occasionally, I would challenge them, but leave it up to them whether or not they wanted to be challenged that day. Short moral here, nothing replaces knowing your students and having that relationship. Finally, affordances. They are probably what Don Norman is most known for, and it is probably also the most abused design principle. So hopefully I will get it rightish. Imagine there's a door, it has a handle on it, one of these bar things. There's no further sign. What is the chance you will open the door? Probably 50-50. The affordance is either pushing or pulling the handle. A door handle that you can press down has one affordance in terms of pushing it down. Still doesn't help you with the push or pull scenario. A press bar or a button you can only push, no doubt, one affordance. Affordances are not what you necessarily intend, but what the user perceives. If you've ever clicked on something and it did nothing, the object had an affordance, but no functionality. If a command was there but hidden, it had no visibility. If an object gives you a readout, but you can also click it, can you say that it has an affordance? One of the affordances that will confuse more and more students is trying to use surfaces as touchscreens. Pupils learn from their smartphones that some surfaces have affordances, although that's pretty non-intuitive. But they will transfer that affordance to other surfaces. I have done this myself with a new television. It was cheap, and I actually bumped a low visibility button. A menu popped up. Great, I thought. A touchscreen menu in this cheap, not to say affordable TV. But no. Several swipes and pokes later, I saw the row of buttons on the underside of the TV, and my heart sank. Never mind. Affordances can be useful when it comes to setting out lab equipment, but they can also be damaging. Balancers have an affordance of putting things on it, and then it returns numbers. The problem is that young students will press as hard as they can on them, potentially damaging the balance. Some things are just designed to set you up for friction and conflict. Try putting a giant button in the classroom with the words, "Do not press" on it, and see how long it takes before a student presses it. Try it in the staff room. I think the result will be the same. So think about the affordances of mini whiteboards and dry erase pens. I never learned to love them. My students would just draw something rude on the back and hold up the answer to the front. In a classroom where quiet work has been planned for, you can give students a sign which they can put up in order to not have to speak or get an immediate answer. They know that help is coming. You can then train other students in giving the help, which is, depending on who you ask, still occasionally a thing. But again, by knowing your theory, or indeed a theory, you can quickly defend what you are doing. Hope you find this useful, and I shall see you later.